ahead, Frida. Houston, you have a problem.
ScreenRanters, welcome back to our delightful content. Today's video isn't about Schwarzenegger and DeVito's film. That would be a weird video. Instead, twin films is a really bizarre concept in cinema. It involves very similar movies being released closely together by different production companies. It can be down to real-world events inspiring the movies, or it could be due to cinema espionage. 007 needs to pay the bills somehow. John Wick, Captain America Civil War, RoboCop, Despicable Me, and many more all appear in this video. And now for the fight of the century. Let's get ready to rumble! At least that's what DC were hoping for when facing off Captain America Civil War with Batman v Superman. With the MCU machine stacking up all the dollar bills, DC wanted to get in on that sweet revenue. So they decided to get two of their biggest heroes to duke it out on screen. Only Marvel were doing the exact same story, except without their characters arguing over the name Martha. Although both films had a villain puppeteering the events behind the scenes. Both films introduced royalty in the form of Black Panther and Wonder Woman into their respective franchises. Suspicious. Both posters show their fight contenders staring at each other, as well as using a similar color scheme. Both films were said to be in development in 2013, and both were released in 2016, within 6 weeks of each other in the US. Who copied who? How could this have happened? Are we looking at a case of espionage? The public have no idea, but someone does. If the person responsible is watching the video, please comment with how you did it. Your secret will be safe with us. Our story begins in 1992. Disney held a pitching session where Army Ants had its story told. It didn't go well. It was rejected. However, a couple of Disney bigwigs, Jeffrey Katzenberg and John Lasseter, liked the idea. Only Katzenberg would later have a falling out with Disney. He later sued Disney and it was settled out of court. He would use the cash pile with the settlement to help create DreamWorks. Then both Disney, Pixar, and DreamWorks geared up for a battle. Both animation studios rushed to create their own versions of Army Ants.
I'm sorry. Can we cut? It's just that I don't think I'm coming across.
Which ended up being A Bug's Life and Ants. Pixar were livid once they found out about Ants. At the time, the creation of A Bug's Life was well known in the animation community. However, DreamWorks were furious that Disney were releasing A Bug's Life on the same weekend as their debut film, The Prince of Egypt. DreamWorks changed the release schedule to seek revenge. When the films came out, it was easy to see that they're incredibly similar. Both films follow an ant that doesn't want to conform. They want to do more, be more. We've all been there. Both these films took the concept of Die Hard in the White House and ran with it, only to create the same finished product. In the space of 3 months, these near-identical films were released to the public. Both films had the White House being attacked from a villainous organization, only for the heroes who both yearn for something more to find a way to thwart the baddies. Whoops, spoilers? Yeah, there's gonna be a few more of those throughout the video. Once White House Down hit the cinema, the film audience had a bad case of deja vu-itis. Don't worry, it's not an actual disorder. We're just using it for dramatic effect. It definitely worked well, considering we're now explaining it. The memory of Olympus Has Fallen was still fresh in the mind of the cinema audience. That may be the reason why Olympus Has Fallen did better at the box office. Die Hard-esque film fatigue. Olympus Has Fallen did so well that it's now had 2 sequels in the series. There's no explanation for how the creation of this twin film pairing came to be. Perhaps one of the scriptwriters copied the homework of the other. In 1995, the world was provided the film Showgirls. Less than a year later, Striptease was released to the masses, and neither did so well. In fact, Showgirls didn't even make its budget back at the box office. Both films followed the theme of erotic dancing, but took different approaches, with Striptease involving a criminal conspiracy and Showgirls involving a lot of criminal activity. Okay, when you lay it out like that, it's a little similar. Once Showgirls was released to a poor reception, Striptease went into damage control to distance itself from its twin. The production company tried to market the film as more comedic than the dark approach Showgirls took. While Striptease did make its budget back at the box office, it didn't get a positive response either. In fact, both films cleaned up at their year's Golden Raspberry Awards. One of the main reasons the films were similar comes in the form of some of the same people working on both features. Both had the same choreographer, Marguerite Derricks. She devised all the dance scenes that heavily featured in both. A horrible incident caused the person to be declared deceased. They're then rebuilt using cutting-edge technology to become a cyborg. Afterwards, they seek revenge against those that caused this Frankenstein-esque situation. If that description sounds familiar, then you've probably watched the cult classic from 1986, The Vindicator. No? Doesn't ring a bell? Well, perhaps that's due to The Vindicator also being remarkably akin to 1987's RoboCop. There's a slight difference between the two, however. The Vindicator had a scientist as the protagonist, while RoboCop had a police officer. But that difference doesn't have any huge implications on the story, as both protagonists are both of the rampaging variety. But before the occupation of the protagonist, the cyborgs are a little different. In The Vindicator, we can see the eyes. In RoboCop, we see the mouth. So that's a change, right? While The Vindicator slid into cinematic obscurity, RoboCop became a franchise, even being nominated for a couple of Oscars. 2005's The Cave may have had almost 10 times the budget of The Descent, but it ended up being the least successful of its twin film pair. The two films took the concept of explorers within a system of caves and added a horror element to the mix. They were only separated by just over 1 month in their releases. The Descent took the more adult approach with an emphasis on horror, while The Cave went in with the less adult approach and more action. Both films added in creepy cave-dwelling creatures that hunted down the explorers. Please don't take kids to watch either film, especially The Descent. We're somewhat adult and we were disturbed. Both films added in tight, near-squishing moments from all the small tunnels within the systems. Certain scenes from the two films were near mirrors of each other. The UK makers of The Descent had heard about their cave rivals, so they raced ahead to finish production as soon as possible, hoping to release earlier than their US counterparts. And they succeeded. The Descent even got a sequel. Both Netflix and Hulu send out complimentary versions of films based on the Fyre Festival scandal. Netflix had Fyre, while Hulu produced Fyre Fraud. In case you don't know, the Fyre Festival was an elaborate modern-day con. It was portrayed as a luxury music festival that is a must for music fans and social media influencers. But it turned out to be a shambles instead. The creators of the festival had purposefully misled ticket buyers and investors. The tickets cost thousands of dollars. So Netflix wanted to be the first to put out a documentary on this shocking scam. They announced to the world that Fyre would be put up on their site in January. Hulu, who had been working on Fyre Fraud for some time, decided to release their documentary as soon as possible. No adverts or announcements, it just arrived on their site, just to beat Netflix to the punch and release their version first. As both films followed the same concept, there's little difference between the two. Both talk to similar people that are connected to Fyre. Even the competing trailers show the same video clips. We think the world is too fired up now. Puntastic. In the space of 4 months in 2010, the world was provided 2 animated films focusing on supervillains. Those films being Despicable Me and Megamind. Each one involves the supervillain protagonist re-evaluating the state of their sorry lives. They both end up switching over to the light side to defeat a bigger bad. The 2 heroic films both had loyal villain minions as sidekicks. Despicable Me was the first film to drop. Due to this, it would become the most successful out of the 2. Once Megamind reached your local cinema, the world had already had its fill of nasty characters turned good. Despicable Me would go on to make sequel after sequel. Currently, Megamind is a standalone film. Even the A-list voice cast couldn't help. It did make a lot at the box office as well, but it's still one of the lowest box office returns that DreamWorks produced, which is pretty, despicable. Armageddon may have made more money at the box office than Deep Impact, but science and critics sided with Deep Impact. Even Ben Affleck mocked the science of Armageddon.
I asked Michael why it was easier to train oil drillers to become astronauts than it was to train astronauts to become oil drillers, and he told me to shut the up.
Cap?
Language!
Besides the gulf in scientific know-how, the 2 films had a ton in common with their stories. Both films featured an asteroid on a collision course to obliterate all life on Earth. With Earth's impending doom around the corner, this left a motley crew of people to bat the large rock away. There's even a heroic sacrifice to stop the asteroid's trajectory in both films. Interestingly enough, there may be a reason that these twin films came to life. The screenwriter for Deep Impact, Bruce Joel Rubin, spoke in an interview that he had a meeting with Disney. As he mentioned his latest project, Deep Impact, one of the executives began to frantically write notes. As it turns out, Touchstone Pictures was one of the production companies behind Armageddon. And why does this matter? Well, Touchstone was a label owned by Disney for their more mature content. 2011 saw the release of 2 films based on that same concept, Friends with Benefits and No Strings Attached. The stories follow a similar path. Both couples get together to have only animalistic fun, and lots of it. But since it's a Hollywood movie, they can't just leave the story with that relationship. Nope, gotta throw some love in there. Both couples realize they've developed feelings for the other person. It's clunky and messy, but they get together in the end. As Friends with Benefits came out roughly 6 months after No Strings Attached, the cast and crew immediately began to dispel the similarities. Only no one was buying it. Weirdly enough, the twin film rivals had a love connection. Friends with Benefits starred Mila Kunis, and No Strings Attached had Ashton Kutcher, who are married now. Bless their cotton socks. In the summer and autumn of 2006, Magic fans had the joy of 2 films involving stage magicians in the 1800s, those being The Prestige and The Illusionist. There was also another magician-based film released at the time, that film being The Scoop, but it's set in the modern day, so we can ignore it. Weirdly enough, Hugh Jackman and Scarlett Johansson were both in The Prestige and The Scoop. Anyway, The Prestige and The Illusionist both follow a similar dark tone in how their feature is presented. While The Illusionist focuses more on a forbidden love, The Prestige involves 2 rivals going head-to-head, and the 2 did well with the audience and critics. In fact, The Illusionist made more money at the box office thanks to its lower budget. However, The Prestige is often remembered more favorably by those that saw it. Both films are based on different source materials, so no direct copying at least. Mortal Kombat definitely won the battle of the soundtrack against Street Fighter. So many 90s parties played that raving track on repeat. After 1993's horrid Super Mario Bros. Film was released, video game fans accepted that film companies would avoid video game adaptations at all costs. Look at this Goomba's tiny head! What is this nonsense? However, video game fans would be shocked to find that in 1994 and 1995, 3 video game films would be released. Double Dragon was also released within a year. Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat are both based on fighting games. While Mortal Kombat was accepted by the masses, Street Fighter is considered one of the worst films of all time. Its saving grace was the outstanding performance of Raul Julia as Bison. Of course! At the time, the actor was battling cancer and took the role for his children who loved video games. While Mortal Kombat would get a poor sequel, Street Fighter was left as a solo entry in the franchise. In 1998, the much-acclaimed The Truman Show was released to the world's boggled minds. Under a year later, EdTV came out. Both of these films involved reality television and the rise of the genre. Well, that sounds ominous, but sorta true as well. Anyway, the difference between the two is The Truman Show's protagonist, played by Jim Carrey, didn't know his life was being beamed around the world to begin with. Meanwhile, the protagonist of EdTV, portrayed by Matthew McConaughey, did. In fact, he signed up for that privilege, until he regrets it. Who knew having your life broadcasted to the world every hour, every day was going to be annoying? Weirdly enough, one of the producers for Carrey's film Liar Liar also produced EdTV. Both of these voyeuristic films take a gander at America's, in particular, growing obsession in reality shows, but not in a flattering way. Mostly looking at the dingy side of it. Instead of finding out who's getting the red rose, we instead watch someone live their drama-filled life. Dante's Peak vs. Volcano. Brosnan vs. Jones. 007 vs. Agent K. 1997 was a hot year, and it was bubbling at the box office between these 2 films. In February of that year, Dante's Peak was distributed to the masses. In April, Volcano was released. However, by the time Volcano arrived, people had already experienced enough volcanic disaster films. At the box office rose the victorious arm of Dante's Peak. Both films showed what would happen if a volcano were to erupt in the old US of A. Dante's Peak covered the destruction in a small town in Washington. Volcano went the route of the city of Los Angeles. On top of Dante's Peak coming out first, Brosnan was at his James Bond peak. Due to this, the audience may have favored viewing his film over Volcano. Neither film made a blazing trail in the realm of cinema. Both steamed out in their history of film. Okay, we had to use more puns, we're sorry. Brosnan and Jones may have been sweating from the heat once they saw the critics' reaction to their films. Yes, we have a pun problem, we're sorry. 2014 created 2 action-packed film franchises, all in the space of a month. We are a lucky bunch. Those being John Wick and The Equalizer. Both cult classics revolve around a similar concept. The main characters of both films are very highly trained operatives. They retired to enjoy a life of pipes and slippers. However, they're soon dragged into action by a horrible deed happening around them. Shortly after, they're wreaking havoc for their friendly neighborhood criminal empire. Well, considering what the baddies did to John Wick's pup, maybe not so friendly. The two films had lots of action and fight scenes to hold on to the audience's attention. John Wick had Keanu Reeves, and The Equalizer had Denzel Washington. Both men well into middle age when these adrenaline-dosed films hit the market. Both films did great at the box office, earning more than double their respective budgets back. With that reception, it was only inevitable that a sequel to each would be produced. Now we have the joy of two franchises being created that stem from twin films. Woo! Twin films! And that's a wrap! Are your minds blown by all the twin films? If so, sorry. Thanks for sticking it out with us until the end. You're such a champ. Now, in order for us to keep the lights on, click subscribe and the teeny tiny bell. It'll send notifications for when we post new content. It's so nifty. If you love the vid, then click the like button and share it with everyone you know. We'll look forward to having you join us again. Cheerio!